All right, thank you. My name is Paul Spiegel. I'm from San Francisco, as just said. It is true that I speak some Spanish, but if you'll forgive me, I would prefer to express myself in English. I am an attorney, as many of us are now, and one of the wonderful things about attorneys at a conference of scientists is that we don't expect to understand a word that most of the scientists are saying, and of course they don't expect to understand us either. So I have tried to make this presentation something that is comprehensible. We are standing right now at the beginning of a new age of longevity, and it's all because of the science that's being done. It is a wonderful thing. I don't think there's anybody in this room that doubts that we are going to achieve radical life extension in the next 20 or 30 or 40 years and radically change the ability of the human race to live a long time. And one of the wonderful things about being a lawyer is I don't have to worry about how we do that. I have to worry about, as Carlos said, what if? What do we do then? Human beings have a very poor track record of making social decisions on the spot when we have a situation that we have to deal with and we haven't thought about it in advance. If you need an example of that, look at what we've done with nuclear power. We finally woke up one day and realized it was here and we didn't know what to do with it, and we made a mess of it. So if we will assume for a moment that we achieve this age of longevity, that things work the way we hope it will, then we have to ask ourselves, what next? How will we sustain this age of longevity? Now, I've been involved with the life extension community for almost 10 years now. I talk a lot to people, both publicly and more particularly privately, about what we're doing. And there are certain questions that come up almost regularly. The first one, of course, is radical life extension just a caprice of the wealthy? Will the rich get this and nobody else? And from that, the next question comes, how do we offer radical life extension more broadly so that everybody can take advantage of it? Can we afford to treat aging as a disease? And if we do, can we afford to treat aging and still maintain our current system of retirement, which people seem to be very fond of? When you get to that, you get to the next question. How does society support a growing number of retirees when fewer people are dying? Now, we haven't given a lot of thought to that yet. If we achieve this, how do we encourage recipients of radical life extension to become productive members of society? When you take all these questions in the aggregate, it's clear that what we need is a new social contract for the new age of longevity. So I'm asking myself and I'm asking you, what if? Now, the premise that we start with is that civilized nations, by which I include all of Europe and a lot of the rest of the world, civilized nations agree that society should diagnose, treat, cure, and prevent disease at the public expense. If there's any doubt about that, have a look at the map of the world. You'll see that most of the civilized world, with some notable exceptions, especially my country, the United States, most of the civilized world believes that public health is a benefit. But if we are going to treat longevity as a disease, and if we're going to be able to cure it at public expense, then we have to figure out how we support this problem. Increasingly, aging is recognized as a disease. The medical aspects of it are becoming clear, and the way that we address aging is becoming more and more clear. We haven't solved it yet, but human endeavor being what it is, I have every confidence that we will. When this happens, aging will be treated like any other disease. Treatment will be provided at society's expense, and radical life extension will provide the cure. Now, this is wonderful, but it's going to be costly. As a result, aging is presently a concern of the very wealthy, and they have the wherewithal, they have the means to solve this problem for themselves. So people ask me all the time, why are you spending your time working on a solution for the 1% of the world who can afford this? Isn't this technology just going to the rich? I say, well, yes, actually it will. At first, and I think that's a wonderful idea, and you should too. Ray Kurzweil once observed that the wealthy always get the best technology first, usually before it's perfected. Does anybody here remember what the first cell phone looked like? Yes, it was big, it was heavy, it was barely functional, and it was remarkably expensive. I don't see a pointer here, but it was approximately 10,000 US dollars in current terms. It was basically limited technology for the wealthy. And they got it first. Now, as we all know, things change. We now have the same technology, vastly improved, for everybody. I wasn't able to find the citation for this, but I heard this statistic just recently that more people in the world have access to a cellular telephone than they do to a toilet. Now think about that for a minute. There are billions of cell phones out there, and the technology that was once reserved for the wealthy has now become universal. And I think that will happen also with radical life extension. Now, when it does, we're going to have to consider changing our system. Consider the current system that we have of retirement, decline, and death. And it sounds grim, but that's what we do. We retire at a relatively young age. That age was determined a long time ago, back when most people didn't make it that far. We work as long as we can, and then we retire, and then we basically get a holiday on the beach at the government expense for as long as we live. Now, this doesn't work very well unless you have a finite, reasonably predictable lifespan. And what we are working on in this community is to eliminate that finite, reasonably predictable lifespan and create a situation where we have an indefinite one. Now, that can't work for us. Our aging system requires an increasingly high participation for retirement to work at all. And once we solve the problem of aging, retirement becomes unsustainable. Now, let's look at this for a second. We have mortality figures from 1900 to 2100. The lower line, of course, is 1900. And if you look closely, you'll see that in 1900, which is about when people started to consider the system of retirement, fewer than 50% of the population made it to age 60. And so they made their rules, and they came up with their conclusions. And they said, okay, we'll set the retirement age about 60, 62, 65. And within 50 years, that number was unreasonable. Nearly 80% of people lived to be 60 years old by 1950. Now, the projection out here is that by 2100, about 95% of the population will live to be 60. And if we go out even farther and achieve radical life extension when people essentially stop dying, except from accidents, almost everybody will. Now, that means we have to come up with a better system. Under the present system, longevity is a gamble. The longer you live, the more you receive benefits from society. It's basically a casino-based system where the longer you live, the more you make out. And that's wonderful for the long-lived population, but it can't work for everybody else. The obvious example of this is Jeanne Calment, who lived to be 122 years and some, the oldest person we've ever been able to document. She received public assistance for a very long time, and indeed, she signed a contract with an hotel when she was 90 years old in 1995, I believe. I'm sorry, calculate the age. But she signed a contract with an hotel when she was 90 years old. It was called en viager, which is the French term for selling something to somebody for a periodic stream of payments, terminable upon your death. And the hotel, being in his 70s, thought, oh, this is great, I'll get this apartment in a few years. He didn't get it. He died before Mère Calment did. And his children ended up paying more out for that apartment that they would have paid if they had simply bought it outright at the beginning of the contract. Now, this is an example of winning the gamble. And it works as long as there are only a few people who win. Like any casino, though, the house has to win, or the whole thing falls apart. So what we need is to change this system. We cannot continue to use the casino-based system of retirement. In fact, we can't really use the retirement system as it is at all. We need a new contract. If people want to receive radical life extension at society's expense, they need to give up their expectation that society will support them indefinitely in their retirement. We simply can't afford that. So they relinquish their claim to society's payment for their retirement. They are not going to be able to live on a beach for the rest of their life because the rest of their life is no longer predictable. Indeed, their life will extend for a very long time. So they will agree, this is my proposition, they will agree to exchange indefinite lifespan for indefinite productivity. Basically, they will agree to enhance society's resources instead of depleting them by supporting themselves and receiving care from society only when it's needed at society's expense. Now, under this system, the old casino model goes away. Longevity is no longer a gamble. Longevity is a privilege. The longer you live, the more you can contribute to society. I defy anybody to tell me that's a bad thing. Now, let's contrast the old system with the one that I'm proposing. Under the old contract, you contribute to society. You work, basically. You work until a certain predetermined age, and then you go on holiday. You enjoy social support for the rest of your life, and you age, you decline, and you die a natural death. It's not something I think most of us feel is a good idea. Some people somehow still do. Under the new contract that I'm proposing, you would receive radical life extension at society's expense, just like you would receive treatment for any other disease. If you had cancer, you would expect society to pay for it. If you were aging, you'd expect society to pay for it, but you would have to agree to contribute to society, just as you did before, for as long as you were able to do so. You would support yourself effectively, unless and until you were able to afford retirement on your own. And if for some reason or other you were hit by a truck or you fell off your motorcycle, society would support you if you became disabled. But the key here, the key concept, is that you support yourself. Now, all of us think this is a good idea. The question is how long? Well, people would work as long as they can be productive. This is not to say that you would do the same thing forever. You could have the opportunity to change careers many times. It's a common maxim in the longevity community that if you live indefinitely, you don't have to do the same thing forever. You could start your career out earning a lot of money. You could have a second career as an artist, a third career as a teacher, and so on and so forth for as long as you're able to do this. This also doesn't mean working forever. The concept essentially is to achieve economic critical mass, to support yourself. Now, some people already do that. Nobody tells Mark Zuckerberg that he has to work for the rest of his life. He's perfectly capable of supporting himself. Most people aren't able to do that because for most people, achieving economic critical mass takes a long time. Indeed, it takes a longer time than most people reasonably expect to live. If we change that system, that won't be impossible for most people anymore. Indeed, it will become the goal. So, the goal is now to work as long as you can, contribute to society for as long as you can, achieve economic critical mass, and support your own retirement. Now, this gives society an incentive to support radical life extension at public expense. Right now, Social Security and public health are the largest items in most countries' budgets. The United States spends 22% of its budget on Social Security, and globally, the percentage budgeted for public health is about 17%. Now, society has a burden there, which will only get greater if we achieve radical life extension and we don't do something about it. However, if we do, we solve this problem. Radical life extension begins to reduce social expenditure, it begins to promote productivity in society, and everybody wins. Now, society should not use this, as we might in America, as an excuse to abandon the vulnerable. You'll have to excuse me on this one, but as an American, I'm ashamed of ourselves, but this is the way we're doing it. We should still provide medical care to people when they need it for all sorts of diseases, including the disease of aging. We should still provide disability payments. People will become injured for reasons beyond their control, and when they do, society should not abandon them. But those who receive radical life extension at society's expense should agree to contribute to society indefinitely, to add to the greater good of society, but only for so long as they're able to do so. The other thing is, yes, society should not create a situation of servitude. People need to have reasons to enjoy their lives. They need to have reasons to live and live well. Society needs to promote personal growth. It needs to promote leisure time, just as it does in most enlightened countries, where you have a guaranteed vacation. We don't. But again, we won't go there. If people want to take a holiday, spend time on the beach, go windsurfing at the age of 130, let them do so. This is important. They also need time for personal exploration. And this is essential if people are going to live an indefinite amount of time. We propose that they should be able to take periodic sabbaticals, as they do in academia, where every 7 years, every 10 years, you get time off, perhaps a year off, to explore other alternatives, to pursue other possibilities, to learn new things, and maybe decide that you want your life to go in an entirely new direction. This is one of the great possible benefits of radical life extension if we think about it in advance and we set it up correctly. Now, people ought to have options. For reasons that most of us don't really understand, there are people out there that like the old system. They don't mind the idea that they would age, decline, and die. They just want that bloody holiday on the beach at government expense. And if that's what they want, that's fine. But they should not have it both. They should not be able to say to society, let me live forever and support me when I do. If they want radical life extension, they have to make that choice. They have to agree to contribute, and if they don't, well, that's no problem. They can still receive socially funded retirement, and they can age, decline, and die, and sooner or later we'll be rid of them and we can move forward to the better system. Now, this provides an interesting situation. It preserves Social Security for those who need it, and it preserves Social Security for those who want it, provided that they agree to die. Okay, that's their choice. Now, if we summarize what we need here, if we are going to achieve radical life extension for everybody that wants it, we're going to need a new social contract. Under that contract, society will provide radical life extension for anybody who wants it. In exchange, recipients agree to productively contribute to society for as long as they're able to do so. Society will continue to support those unable to care for themselves, and people will be fulfilled. They'll be given the opportunity to grow, to learn, to advance, to explore, take sabbaticals, do what they please, and even if they want to, they could have a nice holiday on the beach. That's the proposal, and I hope you'll consider it. I want to thank my staff here, especially Christina Cook, without whom this deck wouldn't have been possible. She's in the audience today. And thank you for your time.